Write on Sports is a program that teaches middle school kids how to write about sports as a way to inspire them to write. Write on Sports is theme-based education. It's about critical thinking, it's about interviewing, it's about building self-confidence.
Our goal is ostensibly to help students improve their writing skills by writing about a topic of interest. And so in this case, sports. We define sports really broadly so that it makes it really accessible for students to write about something that they want to learn more about and care about.
It's an incredibly important program. It gets these kids excited about journalism, and it's really cool that they can go and meet these athletes firsthand. I mean, that's an opportunity that not a lot of people have.
We have a student-teacher ratio of 4-to-1, which means that in this 2-week program, a child is getting a really amazing personal attention about what they're thinking, about what they're writing, about how to write.
It's so rewarding to come back and help these kids. I can see these kids are so willing to learn. I mean, they're here in the middle of the summer writing. Like, that's just the coolest thing to me.
It's the middle of the summer, and it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and the buses are ready to take the students home. And the students are saying, no, give me 2 more minutes. Give me 2, I gotta get this last sentence down. I gotta finish this story. So to me, that speaks volumes about how engaged they are when they're here. You can't ask for more than that.
I really like to write. You know, I'm planning on being a poet one day, and so writing is like really essential to me. So writing and planning on our future stories is the most important part of my day.
Taking the tools from this program as they make career choices, as they make life choices.
You can do anything you want as long as you put your mind and your heart to it.
Hi, my name is Eric Jacobson. I'm the program director for Write on Sports. As you just saw, Write on Sports is a middle school sports writing program, really designed to help students feel more confident and more interested in writing. A key part of Write on Sports is students picking their own stories to do research on and to, really work through multiple revisions, and we produce a magazine at the end of camp. But another important part of the Write on Sports experience is the chance to interview athletes and journalists directly, to get a chance to be working sports journalists. So to do that, we give students background about the guests, we talk about different types of questions, and then we brainstorm some questions to ask our guests. We couldn't do this when the pandemic happened, right? We couldn't have people meeting in person. So we pivoted a little bit and created this, which we call the Speaker Series. And this is the 3rd year of the Speaker Series. And this is a way for students to still get an opportunity to do the legwork, to prepare, to ask the questions, to think on their feet with follow-up questions, and to really have a chance to act like a sports reporter. So last week, we had a guest that talked about basketball. This week is soccer. We're going to be joined by Grant Wahl, who's one of America's most preeminent sports writers, especially for soccer, and Daniel Edelman, who's just joined the big club for the Red Bulls after being on their minor league club for a couple of years. So I'm going to ask some questions to get it started, and then we're going to bring some students on, and they're going to ask questions that they've been prepping. So I'd first like to invite Grant on, and I have some questions myself for Grant. So Grant, thanks for joining us here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, so when we thought soccer, all right, so we thought about you. So we needed to have you for soccer. So my first question is sort of up to the minute. Recently, there was this kind of poll of the 50 best players in the women's game internationally. When I looked it over myself, I noticed there was not as many American women as there has been in the past. I think only one in the top 10, maybe if I'm recalling correctly. You recently spoke to Alex Morgan about this, and I think she had her own perspectives on this. So what's your take on this, the sort of where the American women placed in that list of top 50 players in the world?
Well, I've got a couple of thoughts about it. First off, the fact that there even exist these sort of lists now for top 50 players globally in the women's game, top 100 players in the world. We've seen The Guardian do that list. We've seen ESPN just have their new top 50. That's a sign of the growth in women's soccer that we didn't see these types of lists before. And so interest around the world is growing in the women's game, and all that is great. But what's interesting is the U.S. women have won the last 2 World Cups, so that would suggest that they have been the best team in the world for a while now. And granted, the Olympic Games have a tournament as well, but it's just interesting that these lists and polls of people who follow the sport, mostly journalists, haven't had as many American players as you might expect. And so part of my interview with Alex Morgan last week, who's with the U.S. women's team during World Cup qualifying in Mexico right now, I asked her if she had noticed this and what she thought about it. And she had sort of a 2-part take, which was, it's understandable, she said, and ridiculous. And so the understandable part, she said, was that most of the U.S. women's players play in the NWSL, which is the league that is here in this continent. And a lot of the other players in those lists, almost all of them, are playing in Europe. And a lot of the voters were European, by the way. And so it's a little different. It's hard maybe to compare one league to the other, one continent to the other at the club level. But Morgan also said, look, it is kind of ridiculous because we have won the last 2 World Cups, and we certainly haven't fallen off a cliff as a country in women's soccer. And so she told me that she thought there would be more U.S. women's players on that list next year and the year after.
Once they get sort of on people's radar again with these sort of big international games. One thing that really impressed me about it was the diversity of countries that were represented. Not only, not just non-Americans, but there was really players from a really wide variety of countries. Is there a up and coming women's soccer country that people should have on their radar, do you think?
Well, there's a lot of actually women's soccer international tournaments going on right now this summer. Some as part of World Cup qualifying for next year's World Cup. Some, like the Euros, is the big tournament going on right now, is just the European Championship. And it's really neat, I think, that finally the Euros on the women's side are being shown on ESPN and ESPN platforms in the United States, game by game, and they're giving it legit coverage. And so that's a really good tournament to follow. And obviously the U.S. is playing right now in the CONCACAF tournament. They're in the semifinals, going to play Costa Rica tomorrow night. And so you can watch all those games. There's so many soccer games on television and streaming right now that you can see. In terms of, there's also the South American women's tournament and the African women's tournament going on right now, and you can see those too. So in terms of countries that are emerging, most of them are Europe right now. When you look at teams like, Spain, which lost yesterday to Germany in the Euros, but they are very up and coming. England has taken things to a totally new level. They just beat Norway, a former world champion, 8-0 in the Euros, which England is hosting, and which I'll be actually going over to cover the last week of that tournament at the end of the month. There's other countries that are, clearly there's a lot more being invested in women's soccer in Europe. So you look at a team like the Netherlands, they only qualified for the Women's World Cup for the first time in 2015, but then they got to the final in 2019, won the Euros, and now are viewed as one of the top teams in the world. So things are happening fast in the development of women's soccer globally, and I'm looking for women's soccer to develop even more in other continents, hopefully in the coming years and decades. So I do believe that the growth of women's soccer will be sort of the biggest global sports story over the next 20 to 30 years, just because so much is changing.
One of the students in our camp is writing his feature story on the Colorado Avalanche's rebuild. All right, and he's very, very interested in rebuild. So I think it'd be interesting for students, to look at some of these countries in Europe and how did the Netherlands turn it around so quickly, right? And how did they really move that far that fast? I saw, as a proud Finnish American, the other day, the Finnish women got an early lucky goal in their game and were up 1-0 like after 5 minutes. So for about 10, 15 minutes, I could dream, and then the rest of that game sort of took the path that you thought it was going to take. But it was a nice moment for a few minutes. I want to switch to the MLS. also the sort of European connection. So Wayne Rooney, out at his job in England and back as the manager at DC United. What sort of impact do you think Rooney's going to have at DC United?
It's a really interesting move, I think, for Wayne Rooney, who played for DC United at the end of his career, to come back to the club as the manager. And obviously, he's one of the most famous soccer players globally of the last 20 years. And it was a good sign for him, I think, when he came to play for DC, that he actually did quite well, was clearly committed to it in a way that not every big name European player has been when they come to MLS, and seemed to really care about the club. And the club needs him now because DC United is really struggling. They just lost 7-0 in a game to Philadelphia last week. The season has not gone well. They fired their previous coach very early in the season. And DC really hasn't had much of a direction in recent years, which for me is kind of sad, just because if you look at the history of MLS in the first years of the league, DC United was the gold standard for so many things in MLS. They won several championships, especially toward the start, and their fan base was really good. I remember going and writing a story for Sports Illustrated on the DC fan base, just all the culture that had developed around that. And in recent years, things have really fallen at DC United. And so Washington, D.C. is a great soccer culture in that city. And so for the fans there, I hope that Wayne Rooney can have an impact. I don't think it's going to be possible to totally turn the team around in the flick of a switch, but I also get the sense that he's committed to being there and doing what needs to be done to get this project moving in the right direction.
Yeah, no, he's gotten some criticism in England saying that this is a step backwards in his managerial career. And he's insisting, no, that this is an important part of his growth as a manager. And I think really sort of defending the honor of DC United when he's switching over there. So your perspective, is it a step back for him, or is it a reasonable step forward for his managerial career?
Maybe it's not surprising. I guess I have a bit more of a global perspective, and I see that it's been possible for managers to come to MLS, to do well, to get better as a manager, and then go elsewhere. I think of Patrick Vieira, who came to manage New York City, did pretty well there, and then went back to Europe, and now he's coaching Crystal Palace and is one of the really up-and-coming Premier League managers, I would say. And so I think that's certainly possible for Wayne Rooney to do that. And, I love English soccer culture and everything that goes into that, but I do think sometimes they can be a little insular about what they find value in soccer-wise, because this is the global game. And MLS obviously is not at the level of the top 4 leagues in Europe, but it's a good league. I enjoy MLS. I think it is a valuable thing, and I think it can provide career experience to people like Wayne Rooney that will help him down the line, whether he's going to coach in the U.S. down the line or not.
Okay. All right. So let's switch from the global to the local, and I'd like to invite Daniel Edelman to come on from our local Red Bulls team. Hi, Daniel.
Hi.
Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
So my first question for you is midfielder. So what is it about being a midfielder that appeals to you?
I mean, first off, I love to run, and in the midfield, you've got to be able to run and cover ground. You're in the middle of the park. You're the engine on the team. I play in the more defensive role in midfield, so it's just super fun in there. You're buzzing around, and you got to also be the leader on the team and communicate to your attackers and then also your defenders. So there's a lot of organization that goes into midfield, but I really enjoy it. You get to go forward, you get to tackle, on defensive, win some head balls. You're just all over the place, and that's what I really like it.
So we had a midfielder from St. Joseph's on in our camp the other day, Natalie Nevins, and she mentioned that in a game she might run 10 miles. Any idea how many miles you might run in a game?
Um, I think it might be up there too. I think we have a different metric system for us. We might use meters. Um,
Okay.
like it could be like 12,000 something around there meters, something like that.
All right.
But yeah, I mean,
We have to,
especially with the Red Bulls system that we play, covering ground in midfield is super important. We play very direct and high tempo, very intense defensively, and yeah, you got to be able to cover ground and be able to run.
were there midfielders you looked up to when you were young? I mean, you're still young, but the midfielders that you looked up to when you were younger?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I had went to the Red Bull games when I was a young boy, like 7, 8, 9 years old, and I was able to watch Sean Davis play. He was probably the one guy because last season I was able to train with the first team throughout my year, and I was with the USL team, but I was still able to train with the first team at times, and I really looked up to Sean. He's a great guy off the field, but to learn from him on the field, uh, I look up to him in terms of we share similar attributes where he covers the most ground out of anyone on the team, and he's super simple and he's clean and he gets the job done and he's a super reliable guy. So for me to be able to watch him at a young age at Red Bull Arena and then to now share the field with him, last year, it was super cool and a really special moment because now I get to look up to the guy I'm looking up to. I'm actually on the field with.
So you mentioned as a defensive midfielder, you sort of have to be a captain, right? You have sort of have to like organize what's happening. As a young guy, as a young player, how do you manage that? How do you assert sort of your authority or the leadership role, even though you're on the younger side?
Yeah, obviously, I always will communicate. Just because the guys are older, that's not going to prevent me from talking or saying, hey, like, can you look for this option or can you do this? Like, I need your help here. That's never going to shy me away just because they're older. They respect me. And the reason they respect me is because another way that I can, lead or sort of set an example is just by playing and performing. That's how you set an example with your play, whether that be, starting off with a great tackle, and the team, your teammates are like, okay, wow, like this guy's here to play, like he's gonna battle and give his life for this game, for us to win. So that's a big part. If I don't always can get the words out, doing it on the field is the best way to communicate and let your teammates know that you're here and you're ready.
All right, thanks. So we're going to turn it over to some students now. The first question is from Duke Anel, and she's got a question for Grant. Hi, Duke. You got a
Hi.
question for Grant?
Yeah. Hi, my name is Tukana Delva, and I'm part on the Ride on Sports program at Monmouth University. My question for you is, what are some differences? What are some of the biggest differences when covering and writing about women's and men's World Cups?
So differences between the two sports, or like the
Yeah, I think
okay.
so. Duke Anel, like, what's the reporter's job covering those two?
Yes.
Okay. You know, there's in some ways there's really no differences because whether you're covering a men's World Cup or a women's World Cup, there's a rhythm of covering tournaments, and these tournaments last a month long. And I approach them in very similar ways, which is that it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. And so I've learned over the years, just if I'm going to do a really good job every day covering World Cups, I need to stay healthy. I can't get sick because there's a lot of people from around the world, including media, interacting with each other. I need to get sleep. I need to eat well and make sure I'm doing those things because there's so much going on at a World Cup. You got games on a regular basis. You're covering games, you're covering training sessions. You want to figure out what's the best way to spend your time. I guess if there's any differences between the men's World Cup and the women's World Cup, it's the Women's World Cup is definitely growing. It's not as big globally in terms of people around the world who watch it. And maybe, there's always been slightly fewer games at a Women's World Cup. So it's maybe not quite as much of a challenge as the Men's World Cup, just in terms of work volume. I actually enjoy maybe a little more. I enjoy both tournaments so much, but maybe even I enjoy the women's a little more just because it seems a little more human. I don't know the best way to explain it, but it's maybe just a little more fun to cover, but like it's so much fun just to cover the men's and the women's World Cups. I like both tournaments. I'm going to be at the men's World Cup later this year and at the women's World Cup in New Zealand and Australia next summer.
All right, we have another question for Grant, and this is from Soraya. Soraya, what would you like to ask Grant?
Hi, my name is Soraya, and I'm from the Right on Sports program at Monmouth University. And my question for you is, what are 2 pieces of advice would you give to someone who wants to be a soccer journalist?
Thanks for your question and for all the questions. A couple pieces of advice. If you're doing interviews, one of the best pieces of advice I ever got was from an editor at my first internship at the newspaper in Miami. And he said, ask questions you don't know the answer to. And it seems kind of simple, but it's actually a great piece of advice because if you actually, if you follow your sport, if you observe, if you do your work, and then you still have questions that you don't know the answer to, that means you're going to learn something. And a lot of times, and this happens, I'm sure Daniel's experienced this a little bit in post-game interview situations, where sometimes a journalist will ask a question where they're trying to get you to say something specific, and they ask a question that's leading to that. But you can do that, but like no one's really learning anything new in that process. And so if you ask questions that you don't know the answer to, then, and you do your preparation work, that means you'll learn new things, and your readers and consumers will learn new things. And I think that's something that's always great to remember. And then another piece of advice I would share is, remember it's fun, and covering sports is a privilege. It's also, I've been doing this for 25 years now. And yes, work, you have to do work, but it's also a ton of fun, and don't lose sight of the fact of, if you decide to continue doing this, maybe you want to do this professionally, this really is a fun job, and try to remember that as you move forward.
Grant, I think that's great advice about the questions. As a professor at a university, I tell my students the same thing about papers they write, right? Don't write a paper that you already know what you're going to say, right? Because you're not going to learn anything. That's not very interesting, right? So write papers that are a little scary maybe because you don't know what the answer is going to be. So we have our first question for Daniel. Daniel, this is also coming from the southern part of the state. Michelle has a question for you. Michelle, you got a question for Daniel? Hi, Michelle. You're on camera, Michelle. Ask your question.
Hold up. Something happened to the computer. Give me a moment.
Okay. This happens. We go with the flow. We had a reporter, we were talking to a reporter the other day, and the students were asking him, do you have any tips? And he said that the last question he always asks the athletes that he's talking to is there something else that I didn't ask you that you would like to share? Right? So giving the person you're talking to an opportunity to expand or provide some other insight. And I think that's a really good piece of advice to kind of create that opening. Are we back with Michelle or no?
No, we can't see you, but can you hear us?
We can hear you. Yes, we can see
Okay,
you.
well, we're going to go with the audio because for whatever reason, it's acting up on us. So I'm going to step out of the way and we're just going to do it audio. I apologize.
Okay. Yeah. Michelle, what's your question?
Hi, my name is Michelle, and I'm a part of the Right on Sports program at Monmouth University. And my question to you is, as a midfielder, what is your fitness routine like?
It's a great question. Probably, if we have our intense training sessions that we have throughout the week, and our specific Red Bull style of play, there's a lot of drills that involve heavy running, but additionally, to keep my fitness, better than some of the others, or at least, I want to always be the fittest guy on the team. And to do that, you have to put in some extra work. And whether that be, after the regular training session's over, maybe an off day, do some extra work. That's something that I always want to make sure that I'm at the top or the top few guys on the team, because, everyone has some of the attributes that will separate them from the rest. Some guys, some midfielders have more attacking flair, going into the box, or can play farther passes and range of passing. For me, I always, you always want to be good at everything. But one of the things that I love, or that I really take pride in, is being fit and being able to cover ground. So I think doing extra work and honestly taking the training sessions and the drills and doing them to the max was only going to help you in training, but then it's going to make it easier in the games.
Okay. So Sal from the MSU camp has a question for Daniel as well about kind of staying in shape and making that transition. Sal, you have a question for Daniel?
My name is Sal from Right On Sports in Montclair State University, and my question for Daniel is, what's the transition from Red Bulls 2 to the main New York Red Bulls? Was it exciting? Was it worrying? Or was it like a little bit of both?
I think it was definitely exciting. The Red Bull 2 season was awesome for me. I got a lot of minutes, played a lot of games, got a lot of experience in some high-level games with some real pros, adult men. And that was something that was new to me. I had joined the academy before, and then to jump to the USL, it was still a huge difference with the size of the players and the speed of the game. So that was an awesome season that I had. The team wasn't the best, but I really took a lot of strides in that season. And then transition to the first team, I can't complain. It's been great. This is the life that I want, and that I'm living right now. I think with the staff and the players, everyone makes it enjoyable. You want to have fun in training and enjoy it. There's times where, of course, we need to get the work done, but you always have to remember, even like Grant said, you have to have fun and keep a smile on your face and keep things positive. I think the first team, definitely harder sessions. There's going to be some better players around you in terms of technical ability, decision making. But I think I fit right in, and it's been a great season so far. The team's been doing really well, so I've enjoyed it, and we keep going from here.
Yeah, I think it's a really important point that both of you are making, that something being serious and something being fun is not mutually exclusive, right? You can take something really serious and still enjoy it and have fun. And in fact, if you're not enjoying it, like, why are you doing it? I mean, yeah, you got to keep food on the table and things like that. But yes, you have choices. Sal also had a question for Grant. I think you got a follow-up question for Grant. Sal, do you want to ask Grant your question?
What made you want to write about Beckham's move to LA Galaxy?
So the first book that I did, which came out way back in 2009, was about David Beckham's first 2 years with the LA Galaxy. So he joined in 2007, and it's called The Beckham Experiment. And it's literally the work I've done in my career that I'm the most proud of. I'm proud of a lot of stuff I've done, but that book I put so much into. And I had done a cover story for Sports Illustrated back in 2007 on David Beckham, had gone to interview him in Spain as he finished up with Real Madrid, and it had already been announced that he was coming to Los Angeles. And so I'd done a couple of big stories on him over the years and had gotten to know him, and I knew what a big story this was for American soccer, for Beckham to come to MLS and play in Los Angeles. So I got approached by a book publisher after they saw my Sports Illustrated cover story, and they were like, well, do you want to do a book following Beckham in Los Angeles? And I was like, yeah, I would be interested in that. So did a book deal and then traveled around following Beckham for 2007 and the 2008 season. And it was a really intense but rewarding experience to spend so much time following that team and interviewing a bunch of players and coaches and league executives with the team and the league about the giant impact that Beckham had on so many people just by arriving and joining MLS. So I think when you read it now, it's a pretty good snapshot of a point in time of where Major League Soccer was as a league. And there's a lot of human drama in the book just because of all the stuff that was happening inside the LA Galaxy. So that's the way it all came together and the book came out. But I'm really happy with the way it turned out.
Yeah, it became a New York Times bestseller, which doesn't happen to most books about soccer, right? So that's a really distinguishing, I think, characteristic of that. It's really great that it did that well.
No, it got a lot of attention when it came out, and when you spend that much time on something, you just hope it works out and you feel good about it. Not just then, but here we are 13 years later, and I still feel really good about the book project. I've done one other book since then, but I love doing week to week stuff, but when you find something to report on that's such a big story that it could work for a book, those are really, really rewarding experiences.
Daniel, I would be remiss if I didn't ask you this question, because this is something that the students ask of almost every guest, which is, what other sports do you play or did you play besides soccer growing up?
I was big on basketball growing up. My mom had played at college, so I sort of took that on at a young age, and her being the coach for most of my years, which was so fun. I also loved playing tennis. That's such a great sport. I love playing tennis. And then I played some baseball too, but that didn't last very long. It was pretty much basketball as my secondary sport, and then it was tennis. But playing multiple sports at a young age is so vital. Like, I can use some of the basketball skills that I learned on the soccer field. So
Yeah, that was going to be my follow-up question. What are some of the things that you learned in basketball that you can apply in soccer?
yeah, I think like vision and coordination and cutting. There's a lot of different movements in basketball that even in the midfield, compared to midfielder and let's say like outside back or like a right back, midfielder is more like short bursts. You're not making really long strides on the basketball court. I was one of the shorter guys, unfortunately. Um, but you make shorter cuts and you're the distributor, whereas a right back is making more longer strides up and down the field. So I think the position I played in basketball, really helped me, helped me being a midfielder, and yeah.
Yeah, I've been playing basketball since I was like 4 years old, right? And this is back in the Mesozoic era, right? So soccer wasn't really an option. So when I finally got a chance to play soccer and play defense, yeah, it really made sense to me from a basketball perspective, right? It's about angles and
Yeah.
vectors and like preventing other people from making runs and picks and things like that. So defense was fine. When I had to try to dribble and shoot, that was like a whole other thing that was just completely embarrassing. So I'm glad to hear that basketball was an important part. So one last question for you, Daniel. So what do you think it's going to take for you to kind of keep improving your game? What do you want to work on in your game to take that next step forward?
Specifically in my game, stuff that I want to improve on is definitely starting the attack more and being a more influential player to lead to goals. whether that be get assists or set people up so that they can get assists or clear passes to goal. Obviously, as a center defensive mid with the Red Bulls, I feel like I'm comfortable with my defensive actions and defensive duels and tackling. I still want to improve that to be more consistent with the actions, but a big step is now the six. Can you start attacks and be a key player in the build-up instead of the wing backs or the center backs being the guys? How can we get the midfielder like myself on the ball and play a ball over top that can send a striker into goal? That's a big part of my game that I still want to keep improving on and try to get assists and even some goals. I don't get a lot of goals, but if I could get up there and work on some shooting, that would be great to add to my arsenal too.
Yeah, that'd be nice to put a few in the net. So, Grant, I have one last topic I wanted you to talk just briefly on. You talked about both long-term projects like the Beckham, but then also short-term kind of breaking news type of thing. Any word or what information you can give people about the situation or the Haitian women's national team? I mean, it's a sad story, kind of a distressing story. So if people wanted to get involved or support them in some way, how could they do that?
Yeah, I mean, I just wrote a story that published yesterday. So I have all of my writing now is on my own site at grantwahl.com. And I was in Mexico covering the CONCACAF Women's World Cup qualifying tournament this past week. And one of the teams there is Haiti. And they're a team that actually played quite well at times. They upset Mexico 3-0. And as a result, Haiti still has a chance to qualify for its first ever Women's World Cup, and they're going to be in a playoff in a few months for that. And so on the soccer part of things are going better than ever for the Haitian women's team, and that's a really inspiring story. And then, unfortunately, tragically, off the field, the Haitian women's players have had to go through some really terrible stuff over the years, where there was this really sprawling sexual abuse case that FIFA has banned for life the former president of the Haitian Soccer Federation, and a real systematic culture of abuse that took place. And so part of my story was writing about that and how that story, that case, continues to be an issue, because I talked to people from Human Rights Watch and FIFPro, the Global Players Union, who played a big role in doing the interviews of Haitian women's players, anonymous interviews to protect them from any retribution that FIFA used to ban the Federation president for life for actually participating in this stuff. Mm-hmm. And so if you get a chance to read the story, I think it would be good. It's at grantwahl.com. But if you read that and want to know sort of how can I help, what can I do, I would say a few things. One, Human Rights Watch is a nonprofit organization that did tremendous work here. So consider donating to Human Rights Watch and or the other organizations that look out for the welfare of players in this case, or things like that. And also just in your own community, just to be vigilant, because we've seen, unfortunately, cases of abuse in women's sports, but men's sports, boys' sports too. But here in the United States, we've had some cases in the NWSL with coaches abusing their authority. And just in your own community, if you see something that's inappropriate, go to an adult you know and trust and say something, because this type of stuff can happen in sports around the world, including in the United States, and obviously it's something that needs to end.
All right. Thanks, Grant. That's really, really helpful information. We'll kind of keep our eyes on that and the Haitian women's team in our thoughts. We have one late-breaking question from a student that's able to make it. Woodman would like to ask Daniel a question about your family's history with soccer. Woodman, thanks for joining us.
Hi, my name is Woodman from the Right on Sports virtual camp. I'm here in North Carolina and I would like to ask you if you grew up from a family playing soccer.
Yeah, I grew up. Soccer was really big in my family. My dad played. My uncle played. Grandfather played a little bit. But yeah, my dad really got me into it. He played. He was like a state championship at high school. He went to Columbia High School, and then my dad went on to play at Loyola Maryland. My uncle played at UMass. But yes, they really got me into it at a young age. Soccer, I picked up right away. I fell in love with the sport at probably like 2 or 3 years old, just kicking the ball around. Found such a joy, and from there, they sort of kept saying, you have something here, and I just kept loving the sport. I think it's not so much my dad or uncle or any family that they gave me the option. Hey, you have opportunity to play soccer, but it's all about the player, the person. Do you really want it? Do you want to continue playing the sport? And that's pretty much what I did. It's my passion, and look how where it's got me today. And by no means am I satisfied at where I'm at right now. So just want to keep going and keep taking off.
All right. Thanks for that question, Woodman. Thanks for that answer, Daniel. And Grant and Daniel, thank you for your time. Daniel, good luck going forward with the rest of the season. Grant, good luck with your work and safe travels as you're going all around the globe. Next week, the speaker series is on esports. So if you're into video games and thinking about video games as a profession and as a league, that's what our topic is going to be next week. So Grant and Daniel, thank you so much for your time, and everybody stay safe.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you so much,
Take
guys.
care.
Really appreciate it.